So there are two loose heads just floating around in here somewhere?
You can hear them at night. They whisper to each other and then cry.
Since our host isn't here, would anyone care to mix me a drink?
Horror films ask us many questions. Who will survive and what will be left of them? Who's going to believe a talking head? What's blood for if not for shedding? Do you like scary movies? Have you checked the children? Maybe we'll find the answers together. Thank you for joining us on Photo Flo, Terror in the Smiles. Here are your hosts, Eric Jones and Jake Almond.
Good evening. I'm your host. So there are two loose heads just floating around in here somewhere?
You can hear them at night. They whisper to each other and then cry.
Since our host isn't here, would anyone care to mix me a drink?
Horror films ask us many questions. Who will survive and what will be left of them? Who's going to believe a talking head? What's blood for if not for shedding? Do you like scary movies? Have you checked the children? Maybe we'll find the answers together. Thank you for joining us on Photo Flo, Terror in the Smiles. Here are your hosts, Eric Jones and Jake Almond.
Good evening. I'm your host.
Welcome to Photo Flo. I'm Jake Almond, and this is Eric Jones with me as always, and we are covering two movies that Eric picked, and I'm excited about it because both of them were films that I haven't seen in quite a while, and it's always fun to revisit them. So I'm going to let Eric take it away since this is his week, and thanks for listening.
So this week I decided to go with the theme of superhero horror. For the longest, I've wanted to watch and talk about Swamp Thing from 1982, directed by Wes Craven, who we covered on our last episode with his debut film, Last House on the Left. I think Swamp Thing might be only like his second or third film. So, pretty early in his career, he ended up doing some work for DC Comics. And then we also have on the other side, if you're going to talk DC, you got to talk Marvel. And we're going to talk 1998's Blade, directed by Stephen Norrington and starring Wesley Snipes. So, originally when I wanted to do Swamp Thing, and I was like, superhero horror, I was like, we could do superhero horror, but I couldn't think of another one. And you suggested Blade, and then I was like, oh right, okay, yes, so perfect, that's perfect. And I was like, there too, you got one from that like older post Superman 78, pre-Batman 89 era of the comic book movie, and then you have Blade in 98, which is kind of like the one of the first like watermarks of the like sort of the modern, probably the first thing of the, we would say, of the more modern superhero comic book movie. Yeah, because X-Men would be kind of like the big kickoff there, but then eventually, you'd move into Batman Begins and the MCU and so on and so forth into where we are now. But these two are both with superhero movies with some horror bents, and that was what drew my interest. Swamp Thing. I'll start off with Swamp Thing. I always knew there was a Swamp Thing movie, but for the longest I had never seen it. My first exposure just to Swamp Thing in general was the 90s cartoon, which I don't think even was really actually on TV that long. There was also a TV series that was on USA, I believe, at the time in the 90s also, but I've never seen an episode of that either. And I always knew there was a movie, and I was one day in Barnes and Noble for a Criterion Collection sale, and they had the Blu-ray there, and I didn't get it, but it was sitting there. It was one of those cases where you've been in the store and something is just sitting there forever and ever, and it's like it's only waiting for you to be the one to pick it up. So finally, after it sat on the shelf for a couple of months and nobody picked up the Scream Factory Blu-ray, I finally went and picked it up, and I'm so glad I did, because now I know that it is it's an out of print disc. So it's one of my it may not be the best movie, but it's certainly one of my sort of my prized additions in my collection. Once you know something is out of print. But that was my first. That was when I bought it for on that Blu-ray. That was my first time ever watching it, and I always thought it's cheesy, it's campy. Watching the special features and with some of the interviews with like Adrienne Barbeau, and I did listen to the commentary one time with Wes Craven, and you do get the sense of Craven definitely had something that he wanted to do, but it's clearly compromised. But it's still, I think it's cheesy and it's fun, and I've always liked it for that.
Well, so he was not allowed to read comic books growing up. It goes back to what we were talking about on last week's episode with Last House on the Left. Movies and comic books weren't really part of his life. Music and literature, but not movies and comic books. So, and when I say music, I mean like, I don't even think he would listen to rock and roll until he was, older. I think it was classical music and things like that. So, he's definitely not the typical filmmaker, because almost every other filmmaker you talk to is like, oh yeah, I fell in love with the cinema at this age when I was taken to see Citizen Kane or something, and depending on the age of the filmmaker. Or I would say like people closer to our age probably they'll cite a John Carpenter or a Steven Spielberg movie or something, But Wes Craven was not like we said last week, he wasn't the typical filmmaker. So I believe at this point he had done, I know he had done Last House on the Left, and he had done some TV work, and he had finished The Hills Have Eyes, and those were his two big claims to fame in the horror genre. So he's looking for, during this time, he's looking for, other work, and he's not necessarily trying to stay in the horror genre. So somehow, and I'm not really sure who exactly did it, I'm sure it's in the trivia somewhere, brought Swamp Thing to his attention, and he had no clue what it was. And eventually he, decided on it, he liked the concept enough to, he actually wrote the script for it. And so, yeah, I think initially he went into it very excited to do it, and actually did, by the way, read a lot of the comics. So it's not like he just wrote the script based off the concept. He did actually catch up on the comics that he was, which is something that it was the first time he had ever really gotten into it. And he liked comic books after that. Like, he actually, one of the last projects he did before he died was work on a comic book series, which he talked about at the time, saying, I was able to adapt from comic books to movies, and now I'm going from having to condense my writing for the comic book page. And he was talking about the difference in writing for comic books versus writing for movies, and the difference in having to condense your ideas and you couldn't just write like all these dialogue scenes with comic books. You have to really get the idea across in much shorter, little spurts and everything to fit it on the page. So he was excited about that, and part of what he was excited about was this was his first introduction into comic books, so there was an excitement to it. But what you get the sense of is that the people he was doing the movie for were trying to kind of tell him, you have to change this and you have to do this. And so where you really see that is in the final act. I think you really see things kind of fall apart. I feel like that first hour of the movie is actually pretty cool, and when you get to that final act, it just feels like they just started slapping shit together, like, whatever, we can get it. We just got to get this done. And a lot of his ideas to do these cool action scenes and to kind of carry the theme of what he was going for initially kind of got lost in that shuffle, I feel like, in that last act.
I agree. The last act is kind of where I kind of start tuning out for bits and pieces here, and we both read comics, and we both watch comic book superhero movies and stuff like that, and that last act, that's supposed to be, that's the money there, and it's structured like it's the money, but yeah, it feels very just kind of out there, like even though I've seen this a couple times, like when you get to like that dinner scene, I'm like, yeah, how did that scene kind of end up here? Now, I don't know if it's something that was in Craven's script originally. I don't know, but it just feels like it just feels like one of them things, like, how did we end up here? And there are a lot of strong moments in it, and there are also some moments that you can kind of tell where like his Craven's exploitation background will sometimes come into play. It's pretty muted here. I mean, it's no Last House on the Left or Hills Have Eyes or anything like that, but you can somewhat kind of tell when it comes in. And I do agree, like the first act is pretty strong, and actually that initial action sequence, which resulting in the accident that has Dr. Holland on fire, that's actually a pretty well filmed sequence as a whole. And the second act is a little slower, but I still think it's pretty good. I would agree. It's just kind of once you hit that third act that it feels like everything kind of goes a little bonkers off the rails.
Yeah, and well, the exploitation stuff, strangely enough, that wasn't what he wanted to do. So I guess it had something to do with the way movies were distributed on this budget level at the time. But basically, those extra nude scenes and the other things that were shot, they were shot to get distribution overseas, like in the European market. So those scenes were never meant to be there. That's why they feel so out of place. It's not like it was organic in the tone of the film that they were making, because like that first hour feels like it's aimed at kids. It feels like a family movie, like it's not, the violence isn't really all that harsh, and there's not, really any major adult themes other than just a little flirting or whatever, but it feels very romantic almost, and with the walk through the swamp and the flower, like it sets up like a love story type of thing, man and woman and monster, which is like definitely paying tribute to like the classic Universal monster stuff, right? And I like that aspect of this movie. There's a lot of tribute to like 50s mad scientist movies and even like stuff like Frankenstein or The Creature from the Black Lagoon and stuff like that. So when it's doing that, I think it actually does it pretty well. Like it feels like a cool man in a rubbery suit type of movie, which I like that type of movie. And I feel like it's intentionally cheesy where it should be in that regard. But the oops, sorry, I didn't mean to bang the desk there. But the parts that you're talking about, the exploitation parts, those were forced on him, and I don't know if it's because of his reputation at that time, or if it was just easier to get distribution in certain places if you threw in some nudity, and that's just the facts. I mean, that's why so many of those movies would have scenes like that, sometimes filmed after and spliced in there. Even it didn't just happen to people like Wes Craven. Even like a movie like there was an early Scorsese film before he became Martin Scorsese as we know him, that they basically had to go back in and film just a bunch of random nude scenes that don't fit the movie at all. with Harvey Keitel and multiple beautiful women, and it feels like this French art film out of nowhere in this mob story that's very grounded, and then all of a sudden it's all these like artistic, and it's filmed very artistically, but it's just so out of place. And they did that because that was the only way they could get distribution. So I think that was just kind of the norm at the time in the business when you were at this level, and this wasn't. Surprisingly, this is one of the few DC comic adaptations that's not distributed by Warner Brothers. So, I mean, maybe if he had gotten a bigger budget and was at Warner Brothers, they wouldn't have forced that kind of thing on him. Because it's definitely not the tone that he was going for. Like, if he wanted to do a gritty R-rated superhero movie, he probably could have. But that's not what he was going for. And I think, strangely enough, if you had seen this film years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen those scenes, because those in the American version for years those scenes didn't exist. So it's just more recently that the international version's been the main version that people have seen. I was actually surprised that MGM got in some trouble when they had back MGM had all these like indie film catalogs back in the 90s, and they were releasing all these DVDs. All these companies that no longer exist, and since then I'm pretty sure they've sold all that, but they got into a little bit of trouble with their Swamp Thing DVD back then because it listed as a G-rated film or whatever, but apparently they had accidentally put the international version on there, so parents were buying it at Walmart and thinking it was a family movie or a kid's superhero movie, and it had those scenes.
Yeah.
They had to reissue it. So when Scream Factory did it, I'm pretty sure both versions on that Scream Factory. Remember?
As far as I know, they say it's the American cut. So the international cut is 2 minutes 2 minutes longer. The one on our disc is 91 minutes, and the international cut is 93 minutes.
See, supposedly the American cut didn't have, but like shot, like the scene where she's bathing in the swamp is only shot kind of from the side.
Yeah. And
you never see full on, and then you don't see the two gypsy strippers later on at the dinner party.
Yeah.
But
and in the on the disc there's an interview with Adrienne Barbeau, and she mentions how she didn't know that the contract didn't actually call for nudity. She's not that, making sure I'm phrasing it right. Not that she didn't know. She knew that was in the movie. What she didn't know was that her contract was for the American distribution, and there wasn't supposed to be any. So she's just assuming that when she filmed those scenes that, okay, this is what, the movie is entailing, but she didn't realize that her contract was pretty much just for the American distribution. So
okay.
It was just interesting, the whole idea, just everything about it, and she also mentions how when it started, Craven had a decent budget, and then the minute filming started, they kept cutting it from him.
Yeah, I just don't think they had any faith in it. This is, the only superhero that really made bank at the time was Superman. Like, this was a different world than we live in now. The guy who owned the rights to Swamp Thing during this time when he basically hired West to do it, owned the rights to Batman at the time and did not think that movie would ever get made. So that's how much different the world was in 1982 versus 1989 when they finally, went with that. So he ended up making great money, I'm sure, off the Batman stuff if he owned it at the time when, Warner Brothers did that.
And it was actually produced by the two producers of Batman 89.
Okay, well that makes sense then.
Yeah, they just weren't under. They weren't at Warner Brothers then. But yeah, it was because I never paid attention to it when I watched it in the past. But The producers were Benjamin Melniker and Michael Uslan. And so, yeah, you see their names pretty prominently in those 90s Batman movies. And so, yeah, they produced this. It's just they weren't at Warner Brothers yet. So,
Yeah, and I think from what Wes said, like those guys were great. I think it was the company who put the money up, the whoever that was. They were not good to work for. Basically, is the impression that I've been given reading about it. The things that the movie did right though were the characters were compelling enough that you care about them. I feel like the suit is cheesy, but it at the same time, like I like Swamp Thing, like I like him. By the end of the movie, I even thought the very very ending with him and Adrian Barbeau was good. The Jude the kid, like he's funny. Like every line he's got is funny. It doesn't come across as, to me, it didn't come across as like, cheesy. I liked his character. If you're gonna put a kid in the middle of it, like if this were a movie aimed at kids, I thought that was a cool character.
And the fact
they
that
made him
that they actually put the kid in danger where he was, actually harmed.
he was killed.
You don't see
Yeah,
that
well,
often.
or hurt. Yeah. I thought he was killed. I always took it that he was killed in that moment, and Swamp Thing brought him back to life.
I do believe he was. I do believe, yeah, that was the case, yeah.
And I thought that was cool. And someone, you've listened to the commentary, but I had read that in the commentaries, the guy who kind of, is there kind of asking Wes questions during the commentary, asked him if that was in the comics that Swamp Thing could heal, and Wes said I think it was, but he wasn't sure at the time. He couldn't remember if it came from the comics, but he always felt like Steven Spielberg ripped that off for E.T. I don't know if he did or not, but yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I mean, that kid was cool. Like, he wasn't a useless, like, character like a lot of characters like that would be. Like, he had agency, and actually, I liked him. Adrian Barbeau is written also non-stereotypically for the most part. Like, that first scene where the bad guys come in, she's, like, kicking ass. Like, immediately just starts whooping ass, and then, like, even blows one of them away. And I was like, holy crap, this is years before Sarah Connor or even Ripley, were the tough, female action heroes. So that was kind of, they wrote her as being pretty tough. The only thing is, like, as the movie goes, it just seems like she's constantly getting kidnapped and she's constantly having to run. But it does give the movie, like, the tension, for that first act. There's a scene where she falls down like a couple times, like just running away. She just falls down, and apparently Wes Craven's daughter was on set and turned to him and said, "Dad, women don't fall down when they run." So, and he said that he always remembered that. So I'm gonna now watch the movies that he made after and see if he
Took that as a
stuck
lesson.
with that, because Yeah. He said he never forgot his daughter telling him that. But I do think that despite all that, and despite her still playing a type of role that you'd normally see in a Universal movie, especially at the end when she's in the low-cut gown and everything and tied up in chains, it's straight out of, like, King Kong or anything like that. But, she doesn't lose her. She doesn't just become the screaming, useless character. She's always thinking and helping and trying to figure out how to fix the situation. It's just that by the time we get to the end, we have the Swamp Thing is more compelling when he's fighting these scumbags than he is when he's fighting something that looks like it came out of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
Yeah.
And that whole fight scene at the end felt more like a shit Godzilla movie than it did anything to me. Like, even the way it's filmed, almost the way their movements are so restricted that it's just like, what the hell, it was like watching Power Rangers or something, but I still enjoyed it. It's an hour and a half and it breezes by, and there are some funny moments. I think the funniest lines are that kid. I think Jude, the character Jude, I think he's got some of the funniest lines in the movie. But I don't know. What else did you pick up from it?
One thing I gotta say I liked is the when you were just talking about how it was more compelling, where he was fighting more like the human bad guys as opposed to like the monsters. That was the other thing that I would kind of agree on, because I liked Louis Jourdain's villain. I liked his, I liked his villain. Jourdain, he's a very very smooth talking sort of bad guy, and he'll 1 year from then, this was 82, in 1983 he'll be the villain in the Roger Moore James Bond film Octopussy. So and I was also not reading, but when I was watching the special features during filming of this, his son had passed, so they all the cast was all saying that, for the most part, when he was on set, he'd be giving it all, and he'd work with everybody, but said that when he once they said cut, he was kind of off to himself. His son had passed. I think this said that he had his son had committed suicide or something like that a few months prior to shooting, but he did want to do the movie, and he did want to, you can't really tell because, he's a accomplished actor already. So, just wanted to give Louis Jourdain his props, because like I said, when you have a villain like that that's kind of very smooth talking, you kind of want to see them all throughout. You don't want to see them buried under makeup and costume. That'd be just like in Wrath of Khan, that you put Ricardo Montalban in some sort of rubber suit. You're depriving yourself.
Yeah, and that his reveal is very Mission Impossible, like,
yeah,
with the mask. I forgot about that, actually. It had been a while since I'd watched it. My first time watching this movie, and maybe it was one of the reasons why it kind of stuck with me. I had no clue who Wes Craven was at this time. It was probably around 1990, and it probably was on television. It could have been on USA, because it was around the time that show was on, and I'm pretty sure that it was premiering, or maybe just an episode of the show that they were maybe they were using the movie to cross promote it. I don't know. But I had a medical condition when I was little, and I was probably about 5 years old, and we used to have to go to Duke University, Duke, the hospital connected to Duke Medical, and I would stay overnight, and they would do, they would run tests and stuff. And I did that once a year there for the first, when I was very young like that. So I was about 5 years old, and I already loved movies and everything. So what do you do when you're staying in the hospital? I wasn't sick or anything, but there was really nothing you could do. And there was like a playroom that had like a Nintendo and some Legos and stuff, but you could only go there certain times. So in the evenings, you were just stuck in the room. So, watch TV. And my mom always stayed with me, of course. And there was one night I remember very, very clearly what I watched, and I watched two movies appropriate for this show. I love watching double features, but my double feature that night was The Wizard of Oz, which was the first time I had ever seen that, and Swamp Thing. Don't ask me why. I don't know if I was channel surfing. I really don't remember, but I know I watched those two movies, and I remember very vividly watching both of those the first time. So my first Wes Craven movie, and I always wanted to tell him this. I almost had the opportunity to tell him, but my very first movie was Wes Craven movie was actually Swamp Thing, and I really liked it. I did watch a couple episodes of that show too, but I don't really remember the show much. But I do remember watching this movie, and even though I didn't remember everything about it, I remembered enjoying it. It was when I was 5, it hit and that's what, to its credit, I do feel like the tone, at least like we said in the first hour, it is kind of a fun. Like I feel like I could watch it with the boys, and they would like that first hour because they like monster movies, and it's not and it is a monster movie, but it's not so scary that they've seen like Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and they've seen some of the original Frankenstein and stuff like that. So, and they like that kind of thing. I think they would love The Creature from the Black Lagoon, but we haven't watched that one yet. So I think this has that. Plus, he gets to be the good guy. So I think that they would really like that. So I would like to try to find the version without all the exploitation in it, and watch that version with them. Because I think it works on that level. At least it made an impression on me. So this was actually, as far as I know, because around this same time I was at the babysitter's house and saw Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time. But as far as I know, this was my first Wes Craven movie. So that was my memory of it. And when I had reached out to Wes when we were doing Waxing Cinematic, he actually followed us. And I don't remember why, but we had maybe covered a Wes Craven movie or talked about it on the show and had tagged it on Twitter, and he followed the show. So I had messaged him and asked him if, hey, I know it's a long shot and you don't have to reply, but just wanted to know if you'd be interested in ever letting us interview you for the show or whatever. And he replied back that he appreciated it, that he did not have time at the time, but that he would consider it in the future. So that was like the only time I ever got to talk to him. I was just like, thank you for every movie you ever made. I love you. No, I didn't say that. But I didn't make it weird. I was just like, thank you, I appreciate your time, kind of a thing. And if I had ever had the chance to talk to him, I would have told him the first movie of yours I ever saw was Swamp Thing. But didn't get that chance because that was like, little did I know that he was, suffering from cancer at the time, and it wasn't very long after that interaction that he passed away. So, but yeah, so I've always liked Swamp Thing for that reason, because I just watched it at the right time to enjoy it, and yeah, I mean it's cool. It's got some very watchable moments in it, but it is flawed. I mean for sure, but it's still a fun B movie, and it I really like that it has a comic book feel to it. Like there is especially early on there is you could tell that he did have a vision for it, just that other things kind of interfered. I'll always like it for that reason. I liked how he actually did capture the comic book feel with those strange screen wipes and everything. I think that's kind of what he was going for. He never went quite so far as to like turn it into comic book panels, which I think would have made it a little clearer that was kind of the thing that he was trying to do with those screen wipes. Like it felt like that's why he was doing that, and he was doing that a lot early on in the movie, and then it kind of got away from it. Like I said, it turns into a different movie at a certain point, and I think I really tried to figure out at what point he kind of lost it, what he was trying to do, and I feel like it happens. And when it transitions to that dinner party, like you were talking about, that's the moment where he lost what he was building up to. Everything up to like the origin of Swamp Thing is great. Like you said, the guy on fire, that shit was awesome, man. When he like caught on fire and that visual of him running out the building, that was one of the best burns I've seen in a movie from this period. And that's the same guy. That same guy did the burn in Nightmare on Elm Street when Freddy gets caught on fire in the basement and runs up the stairs. The same guy.
Wow.
Same stuntman. Apparently, he experimented by setting himself on fire with various chemicals out by his family pool. So he's a self-taught, immolation expert, self-immolation. So, woo, yeah, it was good. I liked it, man. It was cool, and I'll go for a couple of years without watching it, and then I'll watch it again, and I always enjoy it. So, it's got that going for it. There, put that on the cover of it. Jake Allman enjoys this every couple of years.
Yep, same thing. We have a Last House on the Left connection from last week's episode to this week's. David Hess, who played Krug in Last House on the Left, plays one of the bad guys, Ferret, in Swamp Thing.
Yep, and he's properly scummy in this. He gets to he's always so cruel.
Yeah,
because he's not just most of these other guys are just like mercenary types or whatever, and he's like, I'm gonna have fun. I'm not just gonna shoot this woman. I'm gonna take her out in the swamp and I'm gonna drown her. He's always got to be a dick. He's also got the goriest death of any of the villains. It feels like they kind of pulled back from it a bit, but the scene Swamp Thing literally crushes his skull and neck and everything, and it's pretty cool.
And yeah, you even see him twitch a little bit afterwards. Yeah, for the longest, I always thought that it was like an R-rated. And then when I looked at the Blu-ray case and had the PG on there, I was like, oh, okay. I was like, okay.
I really think this is a case of the MPAA just never going back and watching it again. I think they were just like, fuck this, we're not watching this movie again. Because this cut that's so prevalent now, that would definitely be an R-rated movie now, surely. Holy crap, the Puritan IMDb Parents Guide for this is hilarious. I'm not going to pull it up and read it word for word, but basically it says something to the effect of large breasts with large nipples clearly visible, and I'm thinking, wait a second, if they were smaller nipples, would that make it less? Would your kids be able to watch it at that point? It's so weird. Like, they make a point to write, to comment on her breasts, which is more offensive than just watching the scene, but whatever. Yeah, it was weird. I love reading the parents' guides on these things.
I love the it's the rage of it that gets me hilarious. It's not even just straightforward. Hey, this is what's in it. Your kids, blah blah blah. It's the rage of it. It's this is in this. It's like, all right, so what's it, like, what's in it. Okay.
But you don't have to go into details on the size of the areola, is all I'm saying.
No. Like you said, like if they were smaller, would that have been more palatable to allow kids to watch? Like, oh, well, they're smaller, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, we're okay with A cup, but when you get to double D's, that's where we're drawing the line. You're not ready for that, son. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But yeah, man, Swamp Thing is cool. I feel like it's, for a certain generation, it's probably well remembered as a little cult film. I don't know how much, how well it plays with the younger kids, but for me, I have that tie back to that. It was a comfort film, I guess you could say, at a time when I wasn't like upset about being there, but it was still nice little warm moment that I remember from my childhood, so I'll always love it for that reason. On the next film, if you want to, are you good with Swamp Thing?
Just one other thing. This is actually our third film with Adrienne Barbeau. We already,
Oh yeah.
We just, we talked The Fog a few weeks ago, which was her debut film. And then we also talked John Carpenter's The Thing, in which she's the voice of the computer.
Oh, okay, cool. I was trying to figure out what the other one was. I was like, I know The Fog, yeah. But I didn't, until you said that, though, I didn't know that was her debut film.
Yeah, I only found that out when I watched the interview with her on the disc, when I watched the movie, because she said that was her debut. I was like, oh wow. But yeah, Chad, talk about a good run. Her first film was The Fog, and then her next was Escape from New York.
Yeah, and she's great in that too. She was so good in The Fog, I just assumed she had been doing it for a while. Next movie came out in 1998.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Blade from 1998 with Wesley Snipes and directed by Stephen Norrington. So I remember when Blade came out, and when it was out in theaters and all of that. I did not get to see it in theaters. No particular reason. It's not like I wasn't watching an R-rated movie or anything like that. It's just, we just didn't get a chance to see it in theaters or anything like that. And so my father rented it when it came out on DVD. Rented it from Blockbuster. Actually, we owned it. We owned it on DVD. I think he rented the VHS, but he rented it from Blockbuster. This isn't my mother's type of movie, so she wasn't going to watch it at all. But me and him, we both watched it, and I thought, I didn't know, I wasn't following stuff like box office or stuff like that, so I didn't know what its box office was like. But I was like, this movie should be a big deal. Like, this thing is like awesome. And I was already familiar with you and kids like you and me. We grew up in the 90s. We know Wesley Snipes already as as an action star and all that. But this felt like a new lease on life for him. I can't remember if this came out before or after his bit in prison. I think it might have been before. I think it might be before.
I think it was before, because I feel like this was like him going big time. Like to be like the main guy of a superhero franchise was a big freaking deal, and only a few people had done it at that point. So
yeah.
And I don't know what the box office on this movie was, but it did well from what I don't remember anybody not liking this movie. And on top of that, like, it had 2 sequels at a time when you had to do pretty good to get that kind of a budget and sequels. And I think Blade 2 especially was most people's favorite, but I always loved this from the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I loved it, and at the time I didn't even know when it came out. I didn't know that it was a comic book. I didn't know it was a Marvel property. So it wasn't until I'm watching the movie, and so my dad is like, he was like, "Oh, did you know?" He was like, "You knew this was a Marvel?" I was like, "No, I didn't." And so that was even bigger. And I'll just say, just as a black kid growing up, okay, that was cool to see that, like, this black superhero was kind of like in the modern movie landscape, kind of like was the first, kind of like one of the first big things, because this was 98, so I'd have been 13 then. So that was also cool. That was also cool, but it was just, it's so stylish. And while the story itself is pretty simple, but it's just overflowing with style and awesome. And I think every, how sometimes, like, there's always, what's the moment that a movie kind of grabs you. I think this is one thing everybody can agree on. I just think that opening rave is just so cool, and I think that's probably the first moment that really grabs people, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't even know what else is going to happen from here, but I'm in for this.
So my first time watching, I remember it coming out because I remember the trailers, and I had no idea it was a comic book movie either. Wesley Snipes was one of those people that was, like, I guess you could say, like Jean-Claude Van Damme or maybe Steven Seagal. I don't know. I was never a big Steven Seagal fan. I know there are people that are, but I was just never one of them. But people that actually could do the fight choreography and not just rely on a stuntman. They actually knew how to do the fights, So he was an action hero, like you said earlier. The only other movie outside of, like, the action genre that I knew him from was White Man Can't Jump, which he's great in. And that was a movie that I snuck and watched, because it was one of those movies in the 90s that was, I feel like, pretty big when it came out, and my dad had taped it, and I loved basketball, and so here's this movie about basketball. So when I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to watch this movie. It was definitely not aimed at my age, but I still loved it. I probably only understood about 45% of what the movie really was, but I still love it. And and actually revisited as an adult, and I still like that movie a lot. So Wesley Snipes he was somebody that I was aware of, but I wasn't aware of Blade as a character. So I didn't go see it in the theater, even though I like vampires and I like Wesley Snipes and all that. But when it came out on cable, it was on one of the movie channels, and one night Dad and I watched it, and we both liked it a lot. And I remember we didn't really talk the whole time. We were into it, and when it ended, that final scene in Russia or wherever, when it cut to credits, he and I looked at each other. That was pretty good. That was our reaction. That was pretty good, and I wasn't sure. It wasn't real. That's not real. It's really not the type of movie that my dad normally would have been into either. But I liked it. So it had the horror. It had the gore, and it had some great action scenes. And this was I really loved The Crow, and that was the movie I guess maybe that it kind of reminded me of more than any other at that time. And then a year later, The Matrix came out. So it was just, to me, and we talked a little bit off the show. But to me, The Crow and this and The Matrix, that was all kind of coming out around that time. And even the soundtrack, this is actually doing some things that The Matrix did and got a lot of credit for that Blade did first. And The Crow to some extent on some of the visuals, but I would say that Blade really did some things on its, like, it kind of did its own thing, and some of the stuff that The Matrix got credit for a year later, it did first. And I'm like, wow, when you watch it now, it's really obvious. It's like, okay, that's really, I mean, I think it was just part of the zeitgeist at the time and what people were into. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, he's got elements of, like, you know, Shaft or somebody like that. I could see that for sure, but he's really doing his own thing, and he's cool as shit. I mean, and Blade is a cool character. I don't know how he is in the comic books versus how he is as Wesley Snipes, but I'm curious on what Marvel does with this character without Wesley as Blade, because I don't think it's particularly edgy, but there are edgy moments in Blade, and are they going to soften that a lot, or, you know, I'm just curious on where they go with it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So and working in the Marvel universe won't be new for Mahershala Ali. He played the villain Cottonmouth in the first half of the first season of Luke Cage. Well, they're all on Disney Plus now, but, you know, the Netflix Marvel, and he was outstanding. But those Netflix shows, as you said, those Netflix shows are you know, were intended to be a more gritty side of a Marvel universe anyway, and the movies aren't going to be that. And yeah, and it's funny because the character of Blade, when he came in the comics, is he came in during the blaxploitation era. And it's funny you mentioned how he was in the movie he's kind of like Shaft. The movie does sort of have that that blaxploitation vibe in it. It's especially the scenes at night when he's out driving and going through the city. When I was watching it, I was like, yeah, you could really, and especially depending on what song from the soundtrack is playing, you're like, oh, you can really sense the blaxploitation vibe of this. I don't own it. Like, he's
just cool. He's cool, and he's wearing the leather jacket, and I mean, like, he's doing his thing, but he's not. But he is heroic. He is like, but at the same time, what I love about him is he's not Superman.
No,
he's Blade.
Yeah,
and ultimately he's got a mission, and he's not just that. He's not out there just to save orphans and and puppy dogs and stuff. So you don't have any moments where, like, let's make sure everybody knows he's a good guy. You don't have any of those moments, and I like that. I like the fact that he's not as nurturing, I guess, because and it makes sense for his character not to be as nurturing. He never had that. and I think the opening of scene of his mom and everything, like, that's really powerful. I thought they nailed that. I don't know how much of that's in the comics, but I thought, what a cool way to open the movie. And I remember that stuck out to me the first time watching it. What a cool origin story. Like, his mom gets bit by a vampire and it changes him, and then he's born, and he's, but like all great, things like this, it's also kind of a curse to him, but he uses it for good, and that's a cool idea, a cool concept. But I'm sorry if I cut you off. You were making a point.
Oh, no. That's what I say. I was just saying that how cool it was that it has this blaxploitation vibe. One thing I don't own it, so I watched it. It was on Hulu. I haven't picked up the 4K yet or anything, but I didn't know if there was any special features. I'm just curious that Stephen Norrington, because he's a British director, so I was just curious if he, if he spoke on any of those visual influences. So I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel like Wesley could still do this character, and maybe he just doesn't want to, because I think you can tell in this one that he's genuinely into it. I don't really remember the second one. I remember a lot of people love that second one. I just never revisited it. And the third one is the one where I think it's obvious that he didn't want to be there anymore. It's to the point that I think it was maybe he did not get along with whoever directed that third movie.
The director of the third was David Goyer, who was the writer of the first.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there was just a lot of stories from behind the scenes of that third one where he just wasn't really wanting to be there anymore, and whatever. But I feel like it was kind of a missed opportunity for fans, but I understand if it wasn't really what he wanted to do. And he was going through some legal troubles at the time. I believe during the time the third movie came out was when all that stuff with the taxes and stuff was happening. So, maybe he was just, I don't understand though why he didn't pop up in more movies like this, because this to me really utilized his comic, not comic timing, but his he got to be the cool with the one-liners and stuff, and he didn't overdo it. He wasn't overdoing it like a lot of characters were, but even that final scene where he's like, motherfucker's always trying to ice skate uphill, like, that's a classic line that everybody loves, and he just delivers it, and it doesn't come across cheesy. It's like, wow, that's awesome. And then he got to do the martial arts stuff, and it really utilized the stuff he was good at. And what I had read was that he originally wanted to do Black Panther, and this was way before Black Panther as we know it now, before the MCU Black Panther. So that was what he wanted to do, and then they came to him with the character of Blade, and when he saw this, and they kind of sold him on the character, and so that's how it came about. But I can't imagine anyone else being this character. He did such a good job with it, but hopefully, and he's given his blessing to the new version. So I'm hoping that whatever they come up with works. It's not like he's like saying motherfuck this and motherfuck that the whole movie or something. It's not like everybody act like, well, he won't be able to curse if they do it through the MCU, and I'm like, that wasn't really a huge part of his character. It's not. Really, the bad guys curse more than the good guys in this.
Yeah, it's more of the, like you said, it's more of the coolness of the line. It's a delivery like Eastwood as the man with no name. That type of
yes.
line delivery.
And he is very much dialed back in this. Like, he's very calm and he's a man of few words compared to like the character in When White Man Can't Jump or something. Like, that's him like turned up to 11, and this is him dialed back
or
cool,
Demolition
like,
Man.
just being cool. Yes, that's a better example. Yeah. Which I did love that movie back in the day too. I haven't seen that in a long time either.
So when the initial like rights and all that stuff was being settled with. They originally wanted to set the film in Mexico, and Richard Roundtree was considered as Blade. Now I don't know what year this would have been, but that would have been very interesting. But
yeah, it's amazing to me that they didn't get Richard Roundtree to be in this movie in some fashion.
Yeah, because he easily could have been Whistler.
Yeah. Which I do like Chris Christopherson in this movie too, but yeah, I mean, I could see Richard Roundtree fitting right into this, and then it would have really driven home the homage to blaxploitation and everything. But who knows? Maybe they tried to get him, and he was doing something else. But I mean, because he pops up, Richard Roundtree pops up in another vampire story right around the same time, because he's got a small role in From Dusk Till Dawn, which was shot.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Probably was shooting around the same time as this movie, truthfully. But I mean, yeah, the '90s of it all, to me, like, I feel like Wesley Snipes transcends the year that he's doing this. Like, I feel like this is just him being cool, and I feel like this character would have worked now in something. The '90s of it all, and I don't necessarily mean this in a bad way, but it comes in with the villain, and I'm just not a Steven Dorff guy, man. And I don't think he's bad necessarily, but something about his hair is like something out of like Final Fantasy, like a '90s anime. There's something about him in this movie that he's so fucking punchable, dude. So, him being the bad guy is a good thing, but I just, I would have rather had the other guy from the creepy guy, oh god, Udo Kier or whatever. I would have rather put him in the role as the main villain, because he's just a great villain, great creepy actor, and I think he would have been a great, like, Hans Gruber type villain for this. But instead we have to deal with freaking Steven Dorff, and this, what's that guy who's like the henchman, and he's just this douchebag that's like, oh man, I got my hand back, man.
Donald Logue.
Yes,
Quinn.
Like, to me, they're written the most like a '90s stereotype action movie villain, like, and they're the worst part of the movie for me, and I don't know if that's how you feel about it or not. But
see, I never. You're not the first person I've seen that has criticized Dorff in this, and it was always, I don't know, it's just always one of them things I never really thought of it. I just used to always wonder, because I was like, oh, Blade was pretty popular, and I was always kind of surprised that he never got more popular, but maybe that was the reason, the reason why. He's very broad. His performance is very broad, and I mean, and it's interesting because they have there's a little story bit that could there's two bits of story to it. So he's the vampire that turned Blade's mom. So he sort of created Blade in that way. Yeah. So there's that, and the other thing is that apparently, with vampire movies, everybody always changes the lore to what they need it to be. So in Blade, people can be born vampires, or you can be turned. And apparently those who are born look down on those who are turned. There's like a pure blood versus, sort of a thing. And I think that I always kind of took, like, this came out around the same time as Buffy, and there was some of that lore in Buffy too. So I thought that was pretty cool, actually. I like that idea. I like that idea too, of it being almost like a virus. She actually says to him, Karen, the character Karen actually says to him, something to the effect of, "You're a virus. She basically says, you're not
you're not even like a real vampire or something like that, which I like that moment. He's not terrible in moments like that, or when he's just being full on gross, like kissing that woman with blood all over his face. It's just all the other little pricky when he's talking on the phone like he's working on Wall Street, and he's like, those are the moments I just want him to die. But yeah, not him in real life, but just in the movie. I like all the supporting cast of this though. Like, there's so many great character moments. They don't shortchange anybody. When Karen's in the under is it Karen's the main girl, right?
Yep.
Yeah, when she's down there and that guy who was hitting on her in the ER or whatever is like all like, I don't know what he is. I guess he's
her ex.
I guess he's yeah. But I'm saying when he's like being creepy, they already set him up to be a creep. But when he's down in that underground chamber and he's all like, I don't know if he's like a ghoul or whatever, but he's definitely not human anymore. But he's obviously all messed up. And when he comes after her again, like every the way they handled her having to escape and Blade being, you know, basically in that Iron Maiden, you know, being bled out and everything, the way they handled her story and letting her have that heroic moment of, you know, basically rescuing our hero and everything. Like, I loved the way they handled all of that and giving Blade the cool, you know, gadgets and stuff. Like, that was straight out of, you know, he's kind of got that Batman thing going on with, you know, Whistler making him new weapons and new gadgets and everything. And she kind of takes over after Whistler dies, by making up that anticoagulant, whatever, those darts. So that was my dad's favorite part when we watched it. I remember he really liked the moment at the end when he kicked that dart right into Stephen Dorff's forehead. So maybe my dad felt the same way about Stephen Dorff that I did. But the scene where he all, like, you know, bubbles up and explodes, like, now the effects have aged, but I still don't mind them. I think they work, you know, pretty well for this. Maybe some of the digital blood dripping, I'm like, why did they do that with CG? Why not just use, you know, blood?
The story as a whole itself is pretty simple. It doesn't really call for a whole lot of, you know, there isn't really much of analysis. But I think sometimes a simple script is fine when you have, you know, and you know, actors that, you know, can carry that. And Snipes does that. Chris Christopherson does that. N'Bushe Wright as Karen does that. But yeah, it's Blade. Like, this was the first time I've watched it in I don't know how long. I think the last time I watched it was when I watched Blade Trinity for the first time, and I did like a whole trilogy rewatch. And so it had been ages. And I was like, oh my goodness, I totally remember what it was like sitting at home when me and my dad were watching this, and it was just like, yeah, this was awesome. Yeah, I gotta get the 4K soon.
Here are some exciting coming attractions from
Photo Flo.
Phantasm. Is it a nightmare? Phantasm. Is it an illusion? Phantasm. Is it an evil? Phantasm. Is it a fantasy? Phantasm. Is it alive?
There was nobody driving.
Whatever it is, If this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. Phantasm.
The kids of Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
We just see cuts happen.
What did that, Lieutenant? I don't know. Tina! The coroner got to say. He's in the jar and puking since he saw it.
They're gonna kill me for sure.
Did you do it?
There was somebody else there.
He was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
No one knows where it came from or who it will visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Do you believe in the boogeyman?
No.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
She's the only one who can stop it. If she fails,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
no one will survive. From Wes Craven, director of The Hills Have Eyes and Last House on the Left, a new masterpiece in fantasy terror, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Podcasts ask us many questions. Who will listen and who will return next week? Who will take the time to rate and review? Check for a new episode of Photo Flo every week. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Photo Flo Terror and Instagram on Photo Flo_terror. Thank you for listening to Photo Flo. We'll find the terror in the smiles.